Chapter 15, This Way to Infinity. Into the cavern rushed 8 of the strongest miners, carrying an immense cauldron which bubbled and sizzled and set great clouds of savory steam spiraling slowly to the ceiling. So there we have savory steam spiraling. Do you remember what that's called? That's alliteration when the starting sounds are all the same. And a sweet yet pungent aroma hung in the air. It made their stomachs growl. Remember, they're headed to lunch. Milo, Talk, and the Humbug watched eagerly as the rest of the workers put down their tools and gathered around the big pot to help themselves. Perhaps you'd care for something to eat, said the mathematician, who offered each of them a heaping bowlful. Yes, sir, said Milo, who was beside himself with hunger. Thank you, barked Talk. The Humbug made no reply, for he was already too busy eating. And in a moment, the 3 of them had finished absolutely everything they'd been given. Remember, the title of this chapter is This Way to Infinity. So can you make any predictions? What's going to happen? Please have another portion, said the mathematician, filling their bowls once more. And as quickly as they'd finished the first one, the second was empty too. Don't stop now, he insisted, serving them again and again and again and again. How very strange, thought Milo, as he finished his 7th helping. Each one I eat makes me a little hungrier than the one before. Do have some more, suggested the mathematician, and they continued to eat just as fast as he filled the plates. After Milo had eaten 9 portions, Talk 11, and the Humbug, without once stopping to look up, 23, the mathematician blew a whistle for a second time, and immediately the pot was removed and the miners returned to work. Ugh, gasped the Bug, suddenly realizing he was 23 times hungrier than when he started. I think I'm starving. Me too, complained Milo. And I ate so much. Yes, it was delicious, wasn't it? Agreed the pleased dodecahedron, wiping the gravy from several of his mouths. It's the specialty of the kingdom, subtraction stew. Oh, we have a helper here. Hey, there, Rocket, let's get out of the picture. Thank you, sir. I have more of an appetite than when I began, said Talk, leaning weakly against one of the larger rocks. Certainly, replied the mathematician. What did you expect? The more you eat, the hungrier you get. Everyone knows that. They do, said Milo doubtfully. Then how do you ever get enough? Enough, he said impatiently. Here in Digitopolis, we have our meals when we're full and eat when we're hungry. That way, when you don't have anything at all, you have more than enough. It's a very economical system. You must have been quite stuffed to have eaten so much. It's completely logical, explained the dodecahedron. The more you want, the less you get. The less you get, the more you have. Simple arithmetic, that's all. Suppose you had something and added something to it. What would that make? More, said Milo quickly. Quite correct, he added. Now suppose you had something and added nothing to it. What would that make? The same, he answered again without much conviction. Splendid, cried the dodecahedron and my helper, the cat. This sounds like the chapter we're starting in math where we're comparing things. More, less, equal to. Suppose you had something and added less than nothing to it. What would you have then? Famine, roared the anguished Humbug, who suddenly realized that was exactly what he'd eaten 23 bowls of. It's not as bad as all that, said the dodecahedron. In a few hours, you'll be nice and full again, just in time for dinner. Oh dear, said Milo, sadly and softly. I only eat when I'm hungry. What a curious idea, said the mathematician, raising his staff over his head and scrubbing the rubber end back and forth several times on the ceiling. The next thing you'll have us believe is that you only sleep when you're tired. And by the time he'd finished the sentence, the cavern, the miners, the dodecahedron had vanished, leaving just the 4 of them standing in the mathematician's workshop. I often find, he casually explained to his day's visitors, that the best way to get from one place to another is to erase everything and begin again. Please make yourself at home. Do you always travel that way? Asked Milo as he glanced curiously around the strange circular room, whose 16 tiny arched windows corresponded exactly to the 16 points of the compass. Around the entire circumference, it's a nice math term, around, were numbers from 0 to 360, marking the degrees of the circle, and on the floor, walls, tables, chairs, desks, cabinets, and ceiling were labels showing the heights, widths, depths, and distances to and from each other. To one side was a gigantic notepad set on an artist's easel, and from hooks and strings hung a collection of scales, rulers, measures, weights, tapes, and all sorts of other devices for measuring any number of things in every possible way. No, indeed, replied the mathematician, and this time he raised the sharpened end of his staff, drew a thin, straight line in the air, and then walked gracefully across it from one side of the room to the other. Most of the time, I take the shortest distance between any 2 points. And of course, when I should be in several places at once, he remarked, simply by writing 7 times 1 equals 7 carefully on the notepad, I simply multiply. Suddenly, there were 7 mathematicians standing side by side, and each one looked exactly like the other. How did you do that? Gasped Milo. There's nothing to it, they all said in chorus. If you have a magic staff, and then 6 of them canceled themselves out and simply disappeared. But it's only a big pencil, the humbug objected. True enough, agreed the mathematician, but once you learn how to use it, there's no end to what you can do with a pencil. Can you make things disappear? Asked Milo excitedly. Why, certainly, just step a little closer and watch. After demonstrating that there was nothing up his sleeves, in his hat, or behind his back, he wrote quickly, 4 plus 9 minus 2 times 16 plus 1 divided by 3 times 6 minus 67 plus 8 times 2 minus 3 plus 26 1 divided by 34 plus 3 divided by 7 plus 2 minus 5 equals. So here's the equation he wrote. Why don't you try it for a moment? I'll hold it there so you can write it down and see what solution you get. I know, you might have to freeze the image so that you can write it all down because I don't want to stay here forever. Here we go, going on. Then he looked up expectantly. 17, shouted the bug, who always managed to be the first to shout out the wrong answer. Have you ever had that in a classroom where somebody always wanted to be first so that they would just shout out an answer without thinking too hard about what it was? But then Milo said the correct answer, which I want you to pause this if you haven't finished solving it yet. It all comes to 0, corrected Milo. Precisely, said the mathematician, making a very theatrical bow. And the entire line of numbers vanished before their eyes. Now, is there anything else you'd like to see? Yes, please, said Milo. Can you show me the biggest number there is? I'd be delighted, he replied, opening one of the closet doors. We keep it right here. And he took out 4 miners just to dig it out. Inside was the biggest 3 they had ever seen. It was fully twice as tall as the mathematician. No, that's not what I meant, objected Milo. Can you show me the longest number there is? Surely, said the mathematician, opening another door. Here it is. Took 3 carts to carry it here. Inside the closet was the longest 8 anyone had ever seen. It's just stretched long. It was just about as wide as the 3 was high. No, that's not what I meant either, he said, looking helplessly at Talk. I think what you would like to see, said the dog, scratching himself, just under 4:30, is the number of greatest possible magnitude. Well, why didn't you say so, said the mathematician, who was busily measuring the edge of a raindrop. What's the greatest number you can think of? 9,999,999,999,999, recited Milo breathlessly. Very good, said the mathematician. Now add 1 to it. Now add 1 again, he repeated when Milo had added the previous one. Now add 1 again, now add 1 again, now add 1 again, now add 1 again. But when can I stop? Pleaded Milo. Never, the mathematician said with a little smile. For the number you want is always at least 1 more than the number you've got. And it's so large that if you started saying it yesterday, you wouldn't finish until tomorrow. Where could you ever find a number so big? Scoffed the humbug. In the same place they have the smallest number there is, he answered helpfully, and you know what that is. Certainly, said the bug, suddenly remembered something to do at the other end of the room. 1/1,000,000th? Asked Milo, trying to think of the smallest fraction possible. Almost, said the mathematician. Now divide it in half. Now divide it in half. Now divide it in half and divide that in half and divide that in half and divide that in half. Oh dear, shouted Milo, holding his hands to his ears. Doesn't that ever stop either? How can it, said the mathematician, when you can always take half of whatever you have left until it's so small that if you started to say it right now, you'd finish even before you began. Where could you keep anything so tiny? Milo asked, trying very hard to imagine such a thing. The mathematician stopped what he was doing and explained simply, why, in a box that's so small you can't see it, that's kept in a drawer that's so small you can't see it, in a dresser, you guessed it, that's so small you can't see it, on a street that's so small you can't see it, in a city that's so small you can't see it, in a world that's so small you can't see it. Then he sat down, fanned himself with a handkerchief, and continued, Then, of course, we keep the whole thing in another box. That is so small you can't see it. And if you follow me, I'll show you where to find it. They walked to one of the small windows, and there, tied to the sill on one end of a line that stretched to the ground and into the distance, completely out of sight. Just follow that line forever, said the mathematician. There you'll find the land of infinity, where the tallest, the shortest, the biggest, the smallest, the most and the least of everything are kept. And you guys just studied comparative and superlative adjectives in language arts, and those were all superlative adjectives. Biggest, smallest, tallest, most. I really don't have that much time, said Milo. Isn't there a quicker way? Well, you might try this flight of stairs, he suggested, opening another door. Milo bounded across the room and started up the stairs 2 at a time. Wait for me, please, he shouted. I'll be gone just a few minutes. And we are to chapter 16, A Very Dirty Bird.